The evening had started like any other Tuesday for Senior Chief Petty Officer Elena Vasquez. She was a quiet force, one of the few women authorized to train the most elite warriors in the United States Navy. For the past 6 years, her life had been a blur of black water operations, desert survival drills, and the relentless sharpening of minds at the Naval Special Warfare Command. But tonight, she was simply Elena. She had pinned her civilian clothes, a simple gray hoodie and worn jeans, over a body that carried the memory of every obstacle course and every hellish night march. Her hair, usually hidden under a tactical cap, fell in a long, dark braid down her back. She had just returned from a 6-month deployment and was on her first leave in nearly a year, and the bar was a weathered wooden building at the edge of a small coastal town in North Carolina, a place where locals went to forget their own shifts. It was not a military bar. It was a fisherman's joint, with sticky floors, a jukebox that played country music too loud, and the smell of cheap beer and fried shrimp. Elena had chosen it specifically to avoid the testosterone-heavy atmosphere of the bases. She wanted anonymity. She wanted to be just another tired woman with a glass of bourbon watching the condensation drip down the side. She found a corner booth near the emergency exit. Old habits. The bar was half full. A few older men played pool in the back. A couple argued quietly near the taps. And then there was Marcus. Marcus Thorne was a Marine corporal, young, broad-shouldered, and recently returned from a deployment that had left him with a short fuse and a lot of pride. He was with 2 friends, all of them in civilian clothes, but carrying that unmistakable rigid posture of active-duty infantry. They had been drinking for 3 hours. Marcus was on his 7th whiskey, and his judgment had long since abandoned him. Elena noticed them the moment they walked in. She noticed everything, the way Marcus's friend kept checking his phone, the way the other one laughed too loud at nothing. She didn't think much of it. She just wanted to finish her drink and walk the 2 miles back to her rental cottage. But the universe had other plans. When she stood up to leave, she accidentally bumped the back of Marcus's chair. It was a light touch, the kind that happens in crowded spaces. She muttered, "Excuse me," her voice low and even. Marcus turned around slowly. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked at her, really looked at her, and something ugly crossed his face. Maybe it was the way she didn't flinch. Maybe it was the quiet confidence that radiated from her even in a hoodie. He didn't like it. "You got a problem?" he slurred. Elena shook her head, took a step to go around him. That's when he stood up. He was 6'2", 220 pounds of muscle. She was 5'7", 140 pounds. He smiled, a mean, lopsided grin. "I asked you a question." Elena kept her hands visible, her voice calm. "No problem, Marine. Just heading home." She had identified his branch by the eagle, globe, and anchor tattoo on his forearm. He bristled at being called out. His friends laughed nervously. Then, without warning, Sir Marcus drew back his right arm and swung. His closed fist connected with the side of her face, just below her left eye. The impact was loud, a wet, cracking sound that silenced the bar. Elena's head snapped to the side. Her bourbon glass shattered on the floor. Blood welled up from a split in her brow. She did not fall. She did not scream. She did not even stagger. She simply turned her head back slowly, wiped the blood away with the back of her hand, and looked Marcus directly in the eyes. For a split second, the entire room held its breath. The jukebox played on, oblivious. Marcus's grin faltered. He had hit her with everything he had, and she was still standing. That was his first mistake. The silence in the bar was heavier than any gunshot. The pool players had stopped mid-shot. The bartender, a grizzled man named Sal, had his hand under the counter on a baseball bat. But he didn't move, because the woman in the gray hoodie was already moving. Elena did not think. She reacted. 6 years of SEAL instructor training had burned responses into her nervous system faster than conscious thought. Her body became a weapon before Marcus could take his next breath. She stepped inside his reach, not away, as any normal person would. That was the first lesson she taught her students. Never retreat into unknown space. Control the clinch. Her left hand shot up and clamped onto the back of his neck, fingers digging into the soft tissue behind his ear. At the same time, her right knee drove upward into his groin with surgical precision. Marcus doubled over, a choked gasp escaping his throat. But Elena was not done. She never did half a job. As his head came down, she used his own momentum against him. Her right elbow, sharp as a hatchet, came crashing down onto the back of his skull. Not a wild swing. A measured, devastating strike delivered from the exact angle she had taught 1,000 times in hand-to-hand combat drills. Marcus's face hit the edge of his own table. His front tooth cracked. Blood sprayed across the wood. His friends finally moved, but not to help him. They stepped back, hands raised. They were Marines. They recognized technique when they saw it. And this was not bar fighting. This was institutional violence. Elena released Marcus and took 2 smooth steps backward. Her hands dropped to her sides. Her breathing was barely elevated. The cut on her brow was still bleeding, painting a red line down her cheek, but her eyes were clear and cold. Marcus lay on the sticky floor, groaning, and trying to push himself up. His right arm wouldn't cooperate. She had hit a nerve cluster near his shoulder during the clinch. He looked up at her, confused, enraged, and humiliated. "Who the hell are you?" he wheezed. She didn't answer. She pulled her hoodie sleeve down to cover a small tattoo on her inner wrist, the trident of the Naval Special Warfare Command. Then she turned to the bartender. "Call an ambulance for him," she said quietly. "He might have a concussion." Sal nodded, already reaching for the phone. One of Marcus's friends, a lanky corporal with a terrified expression, stammered, "Ma'am, you just destroyed him." Elena looked at the man on the floor. She felt no anger, only a quiet disappointment. "He hit me first," she said. Then she walked out into the cool night air. She did not run. She walked at a steady pace down the dark road toward her cottage. The adrenaline began to fade, and the pain in her face sharpened. She could feel her left eye swelling shut. She would need stitches. But her mind was already cataloging the aftermath. She had not identified herself as military. She had not flashed any credentials. As far as anyone knew, she was just a civilian woman who had defended herself. But she knew better. The bar had security cameras, and the local police would respond to an assault report. She had exactly 1 hour to make a phone call. Back at the bar, Marcus was sitting up, holding a bar towel to his bleeding mouth. His friends were telling Sal what happened. "She didn't start it," one of them admitted. "Marcus hit her first for no reason. She just asked to pass." Sal nodded and dialed 911. Now, when the police arrived 15 minutes later, they found a 23-year-old Marine corporal with a broken tooth, a mild concussion, and a story that made no sense. He claimed a small woman in a hoodie had attacked him unprovoked. The security footage would tell a different story. But the officers were puzzled. Who was this woman? And how had she moved like a ghost? By midnight, the local police had a name. The bar's security footage was clear as day. Marcus Thorne, clearly intoxicated, striking a woman who had done nothing but apologize for bumping his chair. Then the woman, identified via credit card receipt as Elena Vasquez, had dismantled him in less than 4 seconds. The officers were impressed despite themselves, but protocol required them to find her. The problem was that the address on her credit card was a P.O., a box in Virginia Beach, and when they ran her name through the system, what came back made the desk sergeant choke on his coffee. Elena Vasquez, Senior Chief Petty Officer, Naval Special Warfare Command, a badge number with clearance levels that the small town's computer couldn't fully access. But the visible part was enough. She was one of the handful of women ever to serve as a lead instructor for basic underwater demolition/SEAL training, the infamous BUD/S. She trained the men who became ghosts, and now a Marine had sucker punched her in a dive bar. The sergeant picked up the phone and called the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. This was no longer a local matter. Meanwhile, Elena sat in her cottage, applying a butterfly bandage to her brow. She had decided against the hospital. Hospitals meant paperwork. A paperwork meant questions. Questions meant her command would find out, and she had no desire to explain to her admiral why she had put a Marine in the emergency room during her leave. She was due back in 3 weeks to train the next class of candidates. A disciplinary incident, even one where she was the victim, could complicate things. The military had a strange way of punishing both parties in a fight, regardless of who started it. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Senior Chief Vasquez, this is NCIS Special Agent Reyes. Please call me immediately. It's about the incident at O'Malley's bar." Elena stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she sighed and dialed. Agent Reyes was polite but firm. He had watched the footage. He had interviewed Marcus, who was now at the county hospital with a mild concussion and a great deal of regret. "He's claiming you used excessive force," Reyes said. Elena almost laughed. "Agent Reyes, he's 6'2" and 220. I'm half his size. He punched me in the face. I defended myself and stopped the moment he was no longer a threat." "That's not excessive. That's textbook." Reyes was silent for a moment. Then he said, "I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've never seen a civilian or anyone neutralize an attacker that fast without a weapon. You have training." Elena did not deny it. "I have a job," she said, "and right now my job is to not be in the news. Can we keep this quiet?" Reyes promised to do what he could, but he warned her that Marcus's family was angry. They were already talking to a lawyer. They wanted to press charges for assault. The irony was not lost on Elena. The man who hit her first was now playing the victim. She hung up and walked to the window. Outside, the ocean was dark and restless. She thought about the 19-year-old kids she would be screaming at in a few weeks, the ones who would quit during Hell Week, the ones who would cry for their mothers. She had spent her entire career proving that a woman could be just as hard, just as lethal, just as unbreakable as any man. And now, a drunk Marine with a bruised ego wanted to take that away. She made a decision. She would not hide, but she would not grovel either. If Marcus wanted a fight, he would learn what it meant to face a woman who had already survived worse than him 100 times over. The news broke 3 days later. Someone at the county hospital leaked the story to a local journalist. And within hours, it had gone viral. The headline read, "Marine punches woman at bar. Turns out." "She's a Navy SEAL instructor." The comments section exploded. Some called Marcus a fool. Others called Elena a hero. A loud minority accused her of entrapment, whatever that meant. But the military machine had already begun to move. Marcus's commanding officer was notified. Elena's chain of command was notified. And both of them were ordered to report for a formal investigation. Elena arrived at the Naval Station Norfolk in her dress uniform. The cut on her brow was held together with surgical glue now, but the bruise had bloomed into a sickly yellow and purple mask around her left eye. She looked like she had lost the fight, even though she had won. That was the unfair part. Perception. She stood at attention in front of a 3-officer panel, 2 Navy captains and 1 Marine colonel. The colonel was a wiry man with a white crew cut and eyes that had seen 3 wars. He stared at her for a long time before speaking. "Senior Chief Vasquez," he said slowly, "I have watched the footage. My Marine, Corporal Thorne, was drunk, stupid, and wrong to strike you. There is no excuse for that." He paused. "But you put him in the hospital. You fractured his orbital bone. You gave him a concussion. You broke one of his teeth, and you did it in 4 seconds. The question before this panel is whether your response was proportional to the threat. Elena kept her eyes forward. She did not blink. Sir, with respect, I was struck without warning by an individual who outweighed me by 80 pounds and had 6 inches of reach on me. I had no way of knowing whether he was armed or whether he intended to strike again. I neutralized the threat and disengaged. I did not kick him while he was down. I did not strike him after he was incapacitated. I walked away and sought no further confrontation. That is the definition of proportional force. The Marine colonel nodded slowly. Then he asked the question that everyone was thinking. You could have just taken the punch and fallen down. You could have played the victim. Why didn't you? Elena finally allowed herself a small, cold smile. Sir, I am an instructor of naval special warfare. If I cannot defend myself against a drunk civilian, how can I expect my students to defend themselves against enemy combatants? Falling down was never an option. The room was silent. The 2 Navy captains exchanged glances. One of them, a woman with silver hair, spoke next. Senior Chief, no charges will be filed against you. This panel finds that you acted in lawful self-defense. However, Corporal Thorne will face court-martial for assault. His career is over. Elena felt a strange pang of sympathy for the young man. He had made one stupid, drunken mistake, and now he would pay for it for the rest of his life. But she did not say that. She simply saluted and walked out. Outside the building, a crowd of reporters had gathered. Cameras flashed, voices shouted questions. Elena kept her head down and walked to her car, but one reporter, a young woman with a kind face, managed to get close. Senior Chief, do you have a message for young women who are afraid to defend themselves? Elena stopped. She turned. Her bruised face was visible to every camera. Yes, she said. Train, learn, be dangerous, and never ever let someone convince you that protecting your own life makes you the villain. Then she got into her car and drove away.